The wind had a cruel voice that evening, a restless, moaning sound that seemed to come crawling across the endless plains of Wyoming territory. Dust and thunderclouds rolled together like dark cattle on the move, turning the horizon to a bruise-colored haze. Somewhere far off, lightning forked across the sky, and the smell of rain and sagebrush filled the air. Clara Wainwright pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she sat on the driver's bench of her battered wagon. Her gloved hands trembled around the reins, though the mare she drove, Old Bess, had stopped responding hours ago to her gentle coaxing. The animal was tired, and so was she. For 3 days now, Clara had traveled alone from Fort Bridger, chasing the dream of a land deed left behind by her late husband, Thomas Wainwright, who had died with a fever before ever setting foot on the acres he'd claimed. She'd promised herself she would finish what he started, settle the land, build a home, and maybe in the wild silence of Wyoming, find peace again. But now the wild had turned against her. The sky above Red River Valley was darkening fast. The wagon wheel had split against a sharp rock an hour earlier, leaving her stranded on the open prairie with the wind cutting like a knife through her thin dress. She had no fire, little water, and less courage than she cared to admit. Every sound, the howl of coyotes, the whisper of grass, sent a shiver up her spine. As she bent to check the broken wheel, she heard it, faint at first, then stronger, the rhythmic drumming of hooves. Clara froze. Her heart leapt into her throat. Riders. For a moment she thought maybe it was a patrol from Fort Laramie, but something in the cadence of the gallop told her otherwise. The sound was lighter, quicker, and as she straightened, shading her eyes against the rising dust, she saw them coming from the west. 5 figures bare-chested beneath the sky, their horses lean and swift, feathers and beads glinting faintly in the last wash of daylight. Cheyenne. Fear hit her like a bullet. She'd heard the stories in St. Louis, tales of raids and scalping parties, of wagons burned and settlers vanished without a trace. She backed toward the wagon, fumbling for the small pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt. Her hands shook so violently she could hardly draw it. The riders spread out as they approached, silent except for the soft thud of hooves. The one in front, tall, broad-shouldered, his long black hair bound in a leather thong, slowed his horse and lifted his hand. His face was hard to read, carved in shadow and dusk. A necklace of claws hung around his neck, and his eyes, sharp, dark, alive, fixed on her like a hawk sighting prey. Clara's breath came shallow. Her pulse thundered in her ears. When he spoke, his voice was deep, rough-edged, and commanding. "White woman," he said slowly, his English clipped but clear. "Why you here alone?" Clara swallowed hard. My wagon broke," she stammered, trying to sound brave. "I'm bound for Fort Laramie. My husband—" The man's gaze flicked to the broken wheel, then to the horizon behind her. He raised his head slightly, nostrils flaring and listening. And that's when she heard it too. Gunfire. Distant but unmistakable, the sharp, rolling crack of rifles carried on the wind. The Cheyenne warrior turned sharply, motioning to his men with a short bark in his own tongue. They wheeled their horses to the north ridge. Then, without warning, he swung down from his mount and strode toward her. Clara backed up until she felt the side of the wagon press against her spine. "Stay away," she cried, the pistol trembling in her grip. He looked at it and then at her, with calm, steady eyes that carried no fear. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for an instant. High cheekbones, weathered skin, a faint scar running along his jawline. Not the face of a savage monster from dime novels, but of a man who'd seen too many winters and too much war. He stepped closer and, in a tone that was half command and half concern, barked, "Inside, now." The sound of his voice was sharp as thunder. Something in it cut through her panic. "What?" she whispered, frozen. "Inside," he repeated, pointing to the wagon. His tone was urgent, not cruel. A soldier giving orders under fire. "Men come, bad men. You stay outside, you die." Clara hesitated, torn between terror and disbelief. Then she heard the gunfire again, closer this time, and the echo of harsh voices in English. Bandits, perhaps deserters, maybe worse. She ducked into the wagon, heart hammering, clutching the pistol like a lifeline. Through the flap, she saw him motion to his men, then turn toward the ridge, rifle in hand. His movements were swift, controlled, the fluid grace of a man born to battle. When the first of the outlaws appeared in the distance, 5 rough-looking riders, their laughter cutting through the storm. The Cheyenne met them with gunfire that split the night. The outlaws shouted and returned fire. Clara crouched low in the wagon, praying, shaking. Bullets thudded into the wooden boards. She bit her lip to keep from screaming. Lightning flared again, and for an instant she saw the warrior silhouetted against the storm. Rifle raised, his long hair whipping in the wind. Then came silence. Only the rain, falling soft and steady now, and the low murmur of horses. Cautiously, Clara lifted the wagon flap. The men were gone. The outlaws, she realized, had fled into the darkness. The Cheyenne warrior stood alone in the rain, watching the ridge. His rifle barrel smoked faintly. When he turned toward her, his expression was unreadable. Neither threat nor pity, just the hard calm of someone who'd done what needed doing. He approached slowly. Clara kept her pistol ready, though she knew deep down she wouldn't fire it. Something in his eyes, quiet, steady, unyielding, and held her still. "You safe," he said simply. "No more shooting." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Only the thunder spoke, rolling across the plains. He looked at her a long moment, then turned away. "You come with me. Camp near river. Fix wheel. Go Fort Laramie tomorrow." It wasn't a request. Clara hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust him. Yet the thought of spending another night alone, exposed to whoever had fired those shots, chilled her to the bone. She looked past him to the shadowy forms of the other riders waiting beyond the rain. One of them led her mare. They had not taken her things nor touched her wagon. Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. He met her gaze with the faintest flicker of something. Perhaps respect. Perhaps sorrow. "Because storm coming," he said, glancing at the dark sky. "And because not all white eyes are blind." For a long time she didn't move. Then, with trembling hands, she climbed down from the wagon, the hem of her skirt heavy with mud. He gestured for her to follow him, and though every step filled her with fear, she found herself obeying. The night wind tore through the valley, carrying the smell of rain and gunpowder. Somewhere above them, thunder rumbled like the growl of a distant beast. Clara Wainwright, a widow who'd once thought her heart dead and buried, followed a Cheyenne warrior into the storm. And though she didn't yet understand it, something deep within her, something fierce and forbidden, had begun to stir. Morning came gray and cold, the air thick with the damp scent of rain and wood smoke. When Clara Wainwright opened her eyes, for a moment she didn't remember where she was. She lay beneath a tanned buffalo hide, her cheek pressed against woven blankets softer than anything she'd slept on since leaving Missouri. Then she heard the faint murmur of voices, the laughter of children, and the rhythmic clink of tools striking wood. She sat up fast and froze. All around her, life stirred in the Cheyenne camp. Teepees stood like pale ghosts in the mist, their smoke curling toward a pale sunrise. Dogs darted between the lodges. Women with long braids tended fires, stirring pots that smelled of herbs and roasted meat. Warriors sat nearby, mending weapons or grooming their ponies. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't in her wagon anymore. She was deep inside their camp, their world. Her heart pounded. She searched the ground beside her for her pistol, but it was gone. Panic welled up like bile. She looked down at herself. Her torn dress had been replaced by a clean deerskin tunic, her boots scrubbed of mud. Someone had tended to her while she slept. "Easy," came a voice. She turned sharply. It was him, Talon of the Hawks. He stood a few paces away, arms crossed over his chest, the morning light catching the scar on his jaw. He looked different now, calmer, almost regal in bearing, a hunter at rest rather than a warrior in battle. The feathers woven into his braid moved gently in the breeze. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. "You safe here?" he said simply. "No harm." Clara's mouth was dry. "Why am I here?" "Storm come in night," he replied. "Too strong for travel. You sleep. We fix wheel today. You go Fort Laramie after." The words were plain, but his eyes held something else, a question she couldn't name. Still, she felt her throat tighten with fear. "So I'm your prisoner until then?" A faint smile touched his lips, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No prisoner. Guest. But camp no place for white woman to walk alone. Some here do not like settlers." Clara followed his gaze toward a group of Cheyenne women who had paused in their work to watch her. Their faces were unreadable, their stares sharp as flint. One of them muttered something under her breath, and the others laughed quietly. Clara looked away, cheeks burning. I didn't ask to be brought here, she said softly. No, Talon agreed, but you be dead if I leave you there. He turned and walked off without another word, leaving her alone with the stairs of the camp. By noon, the storm had passed, and the camp came alive with movement. Children raced along the creek, men rode out in pairs, and the women tanned hides in the sun. Clara remained near the fire where she'd woken, afraid to wander too far. The Cheyenne gave her space, but not privacy. Every motion she made was observed. An old woman approached her with a bowl of stew. The smell of venison and sage filled the air. The woman placed it before her without a word. Clara hesitated, then nodded in thanks. The woman's expression softened for a moment before she moved on. Clara sipped the stew, hunger overcoming pride. As she ate, she watched Talon across the camp, working beside other men to repair her wagon. His movements were precise, economical, the hands of a man who had built and broken many things. The others seemed to respect him. When he spoke, they listened. She wondered what kind of man he really was. Warrior, leader, killer, protector, all of them maybe. Later that afternoon, a commotion broke out near the horse corral. Clara looked up to see two young warriors arguing, voices sharp. One of them, tall, lean, his face painted red and black, jabbed a finger toward her. The other spat something in Cheyenne, shaking his head. Talon strode between them. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. The angry warrior snarled a final word, "Wasichu," before storming off. Talon turned and his gaze met hers across the camp. There was no anger in his face, only weariness. He walked toward her, stopped a few feet away, and said, "Do not go near that one again. He lost his family to white soldiers. He sees your face, he remembers their fire." Clara lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry," he shook his head. "Not your fault." But in his eyes, all white men same. She wanted to tell him that wasn't true, that her husband had been a kind man, that she'd never raised a hand against anyone. But she saw the scar on Talon's forearm, the pain that lived in the lines of his face, and the words died on her tongue. Instead, she asked quietly, "And what do you see when you look at me?" He hesitated. For a moment, the mask of calm broke, and something unguarded passed over his features. "I see a woman who does not belong to this world," he said slowly. "But maybe she wishes she did." The words struck her harder than any insult could have. She looked away, unsure whether she was angry or flattered. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe I don't belong anywhere." That night, the Cheyenne gathered around the fire to sing. Their voices rose like the wind itself, deep, mournful, beautiful. Clara sat apart, drawn to the rhythm of their drums, to the haunting melody that carried across the valley. She watched Talon among them, his head bowed in respect as an elder spoke. The firelight danced across his face, and for the first time she noticed how tired he looked, not with weakness, but with the weight of years spent fighting for a vanishing world. Something stirred in her chest, not quite pity, not yet love, but an aching recognition of loneliness. She thought of her husband, buried 2 years now beneath a cross that no one visited. She thought of the towns she'd passed through, the cold looks, the leers from men who thought a widow traveling alone was fair game. The world had taken much from her, and she'd built her heart into a fortress. But tonight, in the flickering shadows of the Cheyenne fire, that fortress felt fragile. As the songs faded, she rose to return to her tent. But before she could take 2 steps, a hand caught her arm. The same young warrior who had shouted earlier, the one with the painted face, stood before her, his eyes gleaming with anger. He said something harsh in Cheyenne and yanked her closer. Clara gasped, struggling. Suddenly Talon was there. He grabbed the man by the collar, slammed him back, and barked words in a tone that left no room for defiance. The camp fell silent. The younger man spat on the ground and stalked away into the darkness. Talon turned to her. "He will not touch you again," he said quietly. "You have my word." Clara could only nod. Her pulse raced, her breath ragged. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked down at her, his face inches from hers, and for a heartbeat neither moved. The fire crackled between them. She could smell the leather and smoke on his skin. His hand brushed her arm lightly, steadying her. "Go. Sleep," he said finally, his voice low, almost gentle. "Tomorrow you leave this place." She turned away quickly, but not before he saw the confusion in her eyes, and fear, gratitude, and something far more dangerous flickering beneath. When she lay down that night beneath the buffalo hide, she could not sleep. Outside, the drums faded into the sigh of the wind. She thought of his voice, his strength, the strange safety she felt in his presence. And though she tried to pray the feeling away, Clara Wainwright knew that something inside her heart, something wild and forbidden, had already begun to take root. The morning broke crimson, the sky streaked with the colors of blood and fire. A strange quiet hung over the Cheyenne camp, the kind that comes before the world itself holds its breath. The women moved quickly, packing hides and bundles. The men sharpened blades, tested rifles, and spoke in low voices. Even the dogs sensed it, pacing nervously, ears twitching at distant sounds. Clara Wainwright awoke to the hum of tension. The air smelled of fear and gun oil. When she stepped out of her lodge, she saw Talon of the Hawks crouched near the fire, checking his Winchester. He didn't look up as she approached. "What's happening?" she asked softly. He spoke without raising his head. "Soldiers," he said. "Bluecoats. They come from Fort Laramie. Scouts saw them at dawn." Her breath caught. "But I thought—" She stopped, the words faltering. "They're not here to— They come to finish what they start," he said grimly. "They say peace but bring death." He glanced at her then, eyes dark with anger. "Your army," Clara swallowed hard. "Talon, I didn't know—" He stood abruptly, towering over her. "They think all Cheyenne same. They come with cannon and fire. Woman, child, no matter. All burn." The truth of it chilled her blood. She remembered the young warrior who'd called her Wasi Chu, white thief. She had thought it hate. Now she understood. It was memory. She looked toward the northern ridge. Smoke curled faintly there, dust and soldiers moving like ants across the valley floor. Talon barked orders in Cheyenne. Men gathered weapons, women mounted horses. The camp turned to a storm of motion. Yet in the midst of chaos, he turned to Clara. "You go with the women," he said. "They take you away from fight." "No," she said quickly, heart pounding. "If they see me, they kill you too," he cut in sharply. "You wear our dress now. You look Cheyenne. They not ask before bullet flies." "I can help," she blurted, surprising herself. "I can speak to them. Maybe they'll listen." He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not cruel. "You speak, they shoot faster," he said. His eyes met hers, fierce and burning. "Do not try to save men who do not want peace." The ground trembled faintly. The first cannon shot cracked the air like the voice of God. The battle came fast. The U.S. cavalry rode hard into the valley, rifles glinting in the morning light, sabers flashing. Their bugle cries echoed off the canyon walls. The Cheyenne met them with arrows, old muskets, and sheer defiance. Smoke rolled across the grasslands, and the smell of powder filled the air. Clara huddled behind a fallen tree with the women and children. But as the fighting grew closer, screams rose around her. A child struck, a mother crying out. The chaos shredded her fear into something sharper. Resolve. She could not stay hidden. She crawled from the cover and ran through the smoke toward the ridge. Her boots slipped in the mud. Bullets hissed past like angry hornets. She saw Talon near the riverbank, rallying his men as soldiers poured down the slope. "Talon!" she shouted. He turned, eyes wide, and in that instant a bullet tore through the air and struck his shoulder. He fell. Without thinking, she ran to him. He was still alive, blood soaking his tunic, teeth clenched against pain. "You fool," he gasped. "I tell you, stay." "I don't take orders well," she said, half sobbing, pressing her shawl to the wound. He laughed once, bitter, breathless. "You have fire," he murmured. Like storm. Gunfire cracked again nearby. A soldier on horseback aimed toward them, shouting for her to move aside. Clara turned and screamed, "Stop! Don't shoot!" But he didn't listen. Another shot rang out, Talon's rifle steady even from the ground. The soldier fell. The reality hit her like a hammer. This was no place for mercy, no room for words. "Only blood and instinct. Help me," she said urgently. "We have to move you." Together she dragged him toward the rocks by the river. Each step a battle against his weight and the chaos around them. The air was thick with smoke and screams, the thunder of hooves, the smell of burned powder. A cannon blast struck the far side of the camp, throwing dirt high into the air. Clara flinched as debris rained down. When they reached the shelter of the rocks, she tore a strip from her tunic and bound his wound as best she could. His breathing was ragged but steady. "Clara," he said quietly, eyes half-lidded. "Why you stay? You could run." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man behind the war paint. The strength, the sorrow, the stubborn courage that refused to die. Because I couldn't let you die alone, she whispered. His lips curved faintly. White dove, he murmured, using the name he'd called her once before when fever had clouded his mind. You have Cheyenne heart. She brushed a hand over his brow, trembling. Save your strength. The battle raged on. Hours passed like minutes. The Cheyenne fought bravely, but they were outnumbered, outgunned. By noon, the valley was a scar of smoke and ash. The cavalry withdrew at last, leaving behind the dead and dying, and silence heavy as stone. When it was over, Clara walked among the fallen. She helped bind wounds, fetched water, comforted the crying. The women looked at her differently now, not as a stranger, but as one who had stood in the fire and not fled. That night, she sat beside Talon by the dying fire. His wound was clean, though fever flickered behind his eyes. The camp was hushed, broken. She looked out over the plains, blackened by the day's battle, and whispered, How many times must this happen before it ends? Talon stirred. As many times as it takes for men to learn the earth cannot be owned, he said softly. Your people build fences, my people build graves. She felt tears sting her eyes. I never meant to bring harm to you. He reached weakly for her hand. You bring truth, he said. That is more dangerous. For a long while they sat in silence, the stars beginning to show above the charred valley. A wolf howled in the distance, long, low, mournful. Clara felt something inside her shift, a bridge crossed that could not be uncrossed. He had been her captor once, her protector after. But tonight, as she watched his chest rise and fall, she knew the truth. She loved him. Not in the foolish way of young hearts, but with the weight of all she had lost and all she had found again in the wild. When dawn came, the survivors gathered their dead and rode for the canyons. The tribe would heal or perish together. Clara stayed beside Talon's horse, her hand on his arm as they moved through the silent prairie. Behind them, the Red River Valley smoldered, a scar on the land and on her soul. But ahead, in the light of morning, there was still life, still a chance. And though she didn't yet say it aloud, she knew she'd chosen her place. Not with the bluecoats or the settlers, but beside the man who had shown her the price of honor. The canyon walls glowed red in the morning light, carved by centuries of wind and rain, a world of stone and silence, hidden from the eyes of men in uniform. The Cheyenne survivors had taken refuge there, their camp small now, their songs quieter. The fires burned lower. The air smelled of pine and sorrow. Clara Wainwright moved through the camp with a bucket of water, her dress torn, her hands blistered. She had been tending to the wounded since the battle, working beside the Cheyenne women who had once looked at her with suspicion. Now they nodded to her as she passed. Grief had made equals of them all. She stopped beside the lodge where Talon of the Hawks lay resting. His shoulder was wrapped in clean hide, his skin pale beneath the firelight. He'd slept little in the days since the battle, though he pretended otherwise. When she entered, his eyes opened at once. You should be resting, she said softly. He smiled faintly. And let the world burn without me? No. Clara knelt beside him, wringing out the cloth and pressing it to his brow. His skin was warm. Your fever's worse. I have faced worse, he murmured. But not with you here. She looked away quickly. Every day she felt the walls closing in. Not just the canyon's rock, but the weight of what she felt for him. The night before, she'd heard word that the U.S. Army had posted notices in the nearby towns. Any white woman found aiding the enemy would be treated as a traitor. Her name was likely already among them. Talon, she said quietly, the soldiers won't stop. They'll come again, and when they do, they'll kill you, and me with you. He turned his head toward her, eyes calm. Then go, take horse. Follow river east. You will reach white towns in 3 days. And leave you? She asked, her voice breaking. After all that's happened. He didn't answer. The silence said enough. Finally he spoke. You do not belong to this war. Her anger flared. Neither do you. But here we are. He sat up slowly, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. If you stay, they call you traitor. They hang you from a rope. You die for nothing. She stood pacing, heart pounding. And if I leave, I live for nothing. He looked at her, long, searching, as if weighing her soul. You would throw away your life for mine? Her reply came without hesitation. You saved me, Talon. You showed me honor when my own people would have left me to die. If that's not worth my life, I don't know what is." He reached for her hand. His fingers brushed hers, rough and warm. "You are fire, white dove," he said softly. But fire cannot live in the same wind forever. For a long moment, neither spoke. The canyon wind whispered through the pines outside, carrying the scent of smoke and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, lonely, defiant. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat outside her tent, staring at the stars scattered like spilled dust across the dark. The world felt endless, and yet her heart felt cornered, trapped between love and duty. When Talon approached, she didn't turn. He sat beside her, silent at first. "I have something for you," he said finally. From around his neck, he took a turquoise pendant carved in the shape of a hawk's feather. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "She say it bring courage to those who walk alone." Clara's throat tightened as she took it. "Then you keep it." He shook his head. "My path already chosen." "Talon," he cut her off with a raised hand. "Tonight we go. Cavalry scouts close. If they find us here, no one live." She nodded, numb. Within an hour, the camp was on the move. Women, children, wounded, all slipping silently through the canyon trails under the cloak of moonlight. Talon rode beside her, pale from blood loss but unyielding. Behind them, the world of the Cheyenne, their homes, their songs, was left to the wind. By dawn, they reached the upper plateau. From there, the view stretched across the plains like an ocean of gold. Clara looked east, toward the faint line of civilization, and west, toward the wild that had claimed her heart. "We can make it," she whispered, "if we just keep riding." Talon shook his head. "No, soldiers wait at river crossing. You must go alone." She turned in her saddle, fury flashing in her eyes. "Don't you dare tell me what to do." He smiled faintly, that same stubborn smile that had first unnerved her. "You learn fast, white dove." Their eyes met, two souls from different worlds bound by fire and fate. And before she could stop herself, Clara leaned forward and kissed him. The world fell away. There was no war, no tribe, no color or border, only the thunder of blood in her veins and the warmth of his lips. It was fierce, desperate, the kind of kiss born from knowing time was running out. When they pulled apart, his breath trembled. "Now you must ride," he said softly, "before it is too late." "I won't leave you," she whispered. He touched her cheek gently. "If you stay, I die knowing you die too. If you go, I die knowing you live. Which do you think I choose?" Her tears fell freely now. "I hate you," she whispered, voice breaking. "For being right," he smiled. "Good, then you remember me." Gunfire cracked in the distance. The cavalry had found them. Talon slapped her horse's flank. "Ride, white dove!" he shouted. "Ride!" Her mare bolted forward. Clara looked back only once, saw him draw his rifle, turning to face the oncoming soldiers like a figure carved from the earth itself. Then smoke and dust swallowed him whole. She rode until her lungs burned and the sky turned black again. Behind her, the sound of battle faded into silence, a silence that felt like the end of the world. Winter came early that year. Snow lay thick across the plains, muting the land in shades of white and gray. The Red River flowed slow and dark beneath a skin of ice, and in a small cabin near its bend, a thin column of smoke rose each day from the chimney, the only sign that someone still lived there. Clara Wainwright sat by the window, staring at the horizon. Her hands worked idly over a patch of mending, though her eyes never left the line where the land met the sky. Outside, the wind sang low, whispering through the pines. Inside, the silence was deeper, the kind that only comes when one has spoken every word that mattered. Months had passed since the canyon. She never saw Talon again after that night. She'd wandered east until she reached a trader's outpost near the Platte River. They'd taken her for a mad woman, her dress torn, her skin weathered by wind and sun. When soldiers came asking, she gave no name, no story. She was just another widow moving west. They believed her. She built the cabin by spring with her own hands and what tools she could buy. It wasn't much, a roof, 4 walls, a hearth. But it was enough. She planted corn in summer, trapped rabbits in autumn, and listened each night for a sound she could never quite name. The echo of hoofbeats, the call of a hawk overhead, the whisper of a man's voice carried by the wind. Sometimes she thought she heard it. One evening, a trapper passing through stopped by her cabin. He was a wiry man with a weathered face and kind eyes. Over supper, he asked her gently, "You live out here all alone, ma'am? Ain't no place for a lady." Clara smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I ever was one," he chuckled. "You waitin' for someone?" Her gaze drifted toward the fire. The turquoise pendant around her neck glowed softly in the light. "No," she said. "Not waitin'. Just remembering." The trapper nodded, sensing what she didn't say. When he left the next morning, he tipped his hat. "You take care, miss. Ain't many folks got the courage to live with ghosts." When he was gone, Clara stood outside the cabin looking toward the hills. Snowflakes fell, light and silent. The land stretched out before her, wild, endless, eternal. She thought of Talon's words. The earth cannot be owned. She knelt beside the riverbank, brushing snow from a stone she'd carved herself, a simple mark bearing no name, only the image of a hawk's feather. She'd placed it there months ago, not knowing if he'd died, but feeling it was right. When the wind rose, it carried the soft, mournful cry of a hawk overhead. She smiled through her tears. "You still watching, aren't you?" she whispered. The wind answered, a low, tender sigh through the pines. As dusk fell, she lit a lamp in the window. It was her ritual. Every night, one flame burning against the dark. Maybe someone would see it someday. Maybe not, but it made the cabin feel less like a tomb and more like a promise. She sat by the fire, journal open on her lap, and wrote the words she had never dared to speak aloud. "I found love where the world said none could be. I found peace in a man the world called enemy. And though the wind may carry his name away, my heart will always answer when the hawk cries over the Red River." When she closed the book, snow still whispered against the window. The lamp flickered. The river rolled on, steady, unbroken, eternal. Outside, the wind carried two sounds, the cry of a hawk and the faint echo of hooves fading into the night. And in the warmth of her cabin, Clara Wainwright smiled through her tears, knowing the plains, fierce, unforgiving, and endless, would always remember the love that had dared to bloom among their dust and fire.